Hello, Internet. I'm Jackie Fox, and welcome to the final part of my series on gardening, in which we talk about how to grow a revolution. Now, as I promised, the first part of this series has been a lot more focused on ideas practical and related to gardening, because I think that there are many ways. I think that, a lot of the news cycle, a lot of just what we have lived with for the last few years as leftists, the kind of capitalist failures and collapses that we've seen apparent throughout the pandemic, the first real cracks in the facade that I think the world is seeing that is helping them realize that this is not a sustainable model and will need to be, at the very least. Yes, I have a phone alarm going off. I think a lot of people are realizing that this is not sustainable anymore, and that the cracks in the facade of capitalism are really starting to show. I think that that is becoming undeniable. And as we see this, it's easy to see an apocalypse looming. It's easy to see doomsday, because that's very much where we are headed if nothing changes. I think that it's easy to have become disheartened over the time that we have spent in this weird pandemic state, watching our governments fail to even provide basic services to people, watching supply chains fail, watching the cracks in the facade of capitalism become more readily apparent to more people. So what should we as left-minded people be doing? What kind of change should we be fostering? Well, the easy answer is to say that the best way to grow a revolution is through unions. They're at least the most practical way. Unions and strikes. So that's what this video is going to be about. But when I say unions, I don't just mean unions like the worker unions that have been recently winning a lot of victories around the United States and around the world, including some really strong successes being made in India as well. And, the really cool thing about this, and the reason that I haven't made a video about especially the victories here in America, is because, when I first heard about this, it was like, oh, the first Starbucks is unionized. And then a couple days later I hear, oh, 5 Starbucks have unionized. And then a couple days after that I hear, now 8 Starbucks and 1 Amazon location have unionized. And I definitely predicted that this could happen. As soon as the first big name unionizes to show everyone else that it's possible, all of a sudden there's going to be a lot of workers who say, okay, but why not here? And that seems to be what we're living through right now, and getting more into depth in that. In addition to nailing down people who are good at working the labor beat, who can explain this in detail, the kind of detail that I would want to bring you about that's going to take a little bit of time, and I'll get to that when I get to that. But we're not just talking about labor unions, even though they're a big part of the union picture right now and a big part of the solution. We are also potentially talking about any group that comes together for solidarity and for the representation of its members, especially when that is a very broad, very populist membership. Maybe populist isn't the right way to say that, but, essentially groups of workers, customers, various things such as that. The people who do not have power in our current system can be given power through collectivization, through collective actions, through these unions. You could be kind of the alternative to, what are they called? Homeowners associations, which really just exist to impose rules on people that would increase property values, because everybody wants that line to go up, and instead focus on helping people in need within the community. Say there's an elderly woman that has trouble getting out and getting groceries. Instead of using it and even affording them, instead of using a delivery app, someone from the neighborhood could, as a service, pick up her groceries when they go out for their own and just drop them by her house. This doesn't make an extra trip for anyone. Anyways, those type, really what you need to do first, just knock on doors. Start the idea of starting kind of a community membership, program or something. You don't have to say it's a union. You don't have to use socialist terms, but I do think that socialism should be an important key dynamic of what you make. But first you have to figure out what your community needs. This, I think, was one of the great aspects of Occupy, and why Occupy became a kind of a movement incubator. Occupy Wall Street was every bit about Wall Street, and a lot of the generalizations about Occupy come from Occupy Wall Street, as that was kind of representative of the movement. But if you have an Occupy General Assembly that popped up in a rural location, yes, it is going to have a passing concern for capitalism and Wall Street and all of those. But mainly, when people organize in a rural area, they're concerned about things that affect their local community. These are conversations that don't even make sense to have on the national level necessarily. They really need a strong community organization to push them through on the people's behalf on the local level. And a community union could be a way of doing that. We also face a situation here in the United States with a lot of gentrification, with a lot of people being bought out of their homes the second that lines go down, the second that for middle-class investors things start to go tits up. That's when people get bought out of their homes. And companies like BlackRock, the world's largest investment firm, now owns more of America's rental market than anyone else by far. And they are very much treating this as an investment. And especially in a time where a lot of lines are going down, they're going to want to keep that stable, even if it means overcharging people. Rent is only going to go up further as these rental investments are seen as a more stable version of investment that will help you weather a recession. So yeah, that's only going to get worse. And a way that we could fight back against this cohesively, although it would take a very large renters union and a very large rent strike to be able to affect a company such as BlackRock, but through a renters union, through a collective denial of rent, we could send a message to a company in the same way that workers refusing to provide their labor in coordination, a labor strike can also send a message to a company. Is ultimately kind of like the bludgeon in the toolkit of a union. But just from having collective power, you can more easily, do a lot of things an individual person couldn't necessarily do themselves. Such as raising awareness, such as backing community programs that are grassroots funded by the community, and accomplishing things for the community that the government has kind of stepped away from doing. And I think that it's really important that this be the kind of socialist projects that we are endeavoring towards, these types of unions, and that they be inherently socialist projects, to try to create some bulwark against the corrupting powers of capitalism within these organizations, which are essentially just advocacy groups, and we already have those existing within capitalism. A socialist begun advocacy group like a union could eventually kind of cross the line into a more capitalist product that doesn't necessarily have socialist aims anymore. That's why we have to declare it. And also I think that this, no amount of explaining leftist philosophy in YouTube videos or yelling at people on the internet is really going to make the common man accept socialism. The thing that's going to do that is by building dual power structures, building community organizations that are socialist in nature, that provide for that man when the state neglects its need to. When that man is down on his luck, a socialist organization must be well connected enough with the community to know that person needs help, and also have the means through collectivization to help that person. If we stick up for enough people in this way, if enough people have a family member or a friend who has been basically rescued from capitalism by a socialist organization in one way or another, then maybe we have a chance at actually getting the public, both in our local communities and on broader levels, to accept a socialist elected leader, like an actually socialist elected leader, like to the left of Bernie elected leader. But I don't think that that's going to happen without, us proving that our philosophy works, and that it is more compassionate, and that it cares for the people who fall through the cracks of capitalism. Because, the only organizations out there right now that are really doing that work are generally pretty liberal ones, honestly. And and again, like I said, advocacy groups aren't anything new, but the idea of a socialist advocacy group also really isn't new. But we need to ramp these up, because, ideally, there is a point where you could overcome a government by the people just kind of agreeing that you provide for them better than the government does, being kind of a if you play Civilization, a cultural revolution, a cultural win, cultural victory. Your culture was just so much better that the people said, you know what, fuck the government, we're going to go with these guys. Or we could foster change within the system and, overcome it. A lot of people think that we need a third party to do this. A lot of people insist on creating change within the Liberal Party, or liberal parties. This is mainly an American thing. Although there are a lot of left-oriented parties in other countries that are really functionally more liberal, or that are basically third parties that can't win. I think what we need is a power structure that is big enough and cohesive enough and connected to enough people for all of these other reasons to be doing all of this other work, that just from the fact that we are unified, not coming together purely to support a political network, but supporting the community, and in doing so creating a political network that can have a power of endorsement, that can actually do things that would be able to, counteract at least the power of your local Democratic Party, and be able to get in a socialist candidate under the Democratic name. Because, people don't vote third party, unfortunately, even if the third party candidate is the most principled. That just doesn't motivate voters, unfortunately, from what we see in America. So we have to kind of hijack that. And it has been successful before on a more local level. Bernie Sanders being a pretty good example of that, even though he's not as far to the left as he could be. Even if we had elected him president, it wouldn't be a socialist revolution, even though it would help. And let's be honest, we have seen in South America many, many times, there is the meme that the only place that socialism could start is America, because we won't bomb ourselves. But at the same time, a president that actually threatened the capitalist nature of America would probably rapidly find themselves with a lot more lead than they started their campaign with. I'm just saying. But if there was an actual real movement, like a real structure behind that could compete with the influences of capital in the market, in the marketplace of ideas, in the marketplace of political candidates. If there was such a thing, that would help get those people elected and help us see the types of governance changes that we know we need. And maybe through doing that, through really proving ourselves first before asking that we elect people based on this idea of socialism they don't know anything about outside of theory, or people talking about theory on YouTube. But if you could go to, just imagine if there was something like a human union that had branches in every town where people just kind of collectively donated extra resources and their labor, and these were redistributed to those who needed it within the community. Or you could go to like a socialist Salvation Army and get a meal and get maybe rent assistance and get some new clothes to wear all in the same building. Maybe even get a checkup from a doctor that volunteers a couple extra hours of their time to help this project along, you know? Like, if we had that type of thing in place, if people knew, if that was the association that people had with instead of some typically white person on the internet telling them that it's a good idea, I think we would win a lot more of the working class. And ultimately, if it's not our goal to win over the working class in order to overthrow the ownership class of our own countries, what the fuck are we doing, guys? Why? Just seems like the way we should go. Now, I'm terrible at this. I'm honestly, for a person who makes YouTube videos, pretty shy. I don't know many of my neighbors, and I'm kind of scared of knocking on their doors. But hopefully this message in a bottle will reach enough people who say, well, damn, Jackie, that's pretty simple. I'm an extrovert. I could do that. I'm going to go talk to my neighborhood and find out what we need and find a way to advocate for it. And I mean, there's a lot of things that like even a neighborhood union could do. Say you have a lot of potholes on your road. You could get a group of people from your community that happen to have a little bit of free time in a specific afternoon and, you know, organize them to go and speak at the local town council meeting about how these funds are directed, and have 5 people in a row make their case for why their road needs to be fixed. Usually they'll give you like 3 or 4 or 5 minutes per person. So if you can get a block of like 6 people, you can take up an entire half hour of their time just preaching why you need to fix this damn road. And that allows us, through collective action, to have kind of the same power that a union would have just within our local community. And this was one thing that briefly Occupy was doing. And I know that this is more a memento of my past than it is a real path into a future socialism, but it does show us a way that we could take. But if you want to know about the future of socialism, that is going to be an entirely separate video, and I'm going to explore what future socialism might look like by looking at the socialism of the past. Now, this is going to be more of a summary because the sources for this, I've found some incredible content that I can't wait to share with you. Some really talented creators, some really talented channels that I didn't know existed before I started looking into this topic. But in a future video, we're going to be talking about Cinco, or Cybersyn, which was a Chilean program that was quite possibly the first, which was quite possibly like the first socialized internet. And now that we live in the internet age, it might be interesting to take a few of these, not necessarily tried and true, because that whole project unfortunately ended under 2 years in, thanks to a US-backed coup. Go figure. Again, people tend to find a little bit more lead in them when they actually go against the capitalist power structure. But it does show us a vision of the future that is largely in place now, but not serving the right interests. So I think that's super interesting, and I hope that you will subscribe and like this video and stick around until that content reaches you in the future. In the meantime, thank you for watching today. Thank you for sticking around to the end, and I hope you have a great day. And I hope that in some way in watching this, you can feel empowered. And you can take that empowerment and use it to help those around you. And that those around you might feel empowered from that and help them around themselves. And that we can start a chain reaction in unifying each other and becoming a chain. Becoming a chained male that can defend the working class. That was a strange metaphor, but I like it. Let's be the armor of the common man. And to do that, we have to come together. So, I've given you plenty of ideas of how you might be able to do that. It's time for you to put them into action. And hey, if you do, like, especially if you're really starting like kind of a neighborhood interest union or a neighborhood advocacy group or something like that, send me your progress. Like, tell me all about it. Send me videos. I'll host your progress on the channel because, again, I'm kind of an introvert to be doing this. But if you do it, I would love to be able to show other people that, because kind of like starting the first Starbucks union instantly spread like wildfire. I think that if you show yourself doing these kinds of things, then maybe other people will be more willing to say, yeah, man, I can do that. And that's that spirit, that enthusiasm, that's what I hope that we can create together. If you have any ideas about how to inspire the world to enact more radical change, let me know in the comments. I am super open to it. Maybe I'm even not like the wokest leftist you've ever seen or something, and maybe you feel like there's some place that my critique is missing. Some philosophical core, something you think you can add, let me know in the comments. I mean, I am not mad about your criticism. I appreciate it, and I welcome it, because critique helps us become better versions of ourselves. So leave your critiques in the comments, and I'll see you next time. Take 2. Hello, Internet. I'm Jackie Fox, and I just got done making a series of videos about gardening for my patrons. If you would like to see those videos, you could always join my Patreon, but if you're not in a place to make that sort of a commitment to the channel, and I get it, and especially since I haven't put out a lot of public content, at least lately, you can always just wait. I will probably eventually release that series, but it's nothing you couldn't figure out about gardening, and I'll be happy to share some of the specs anyways outside of that. But the point of that series, other than just gardening, was to me about the sense of listlessness that I felt during the pandemic, and how it felt like the world was ending. And it's not just the virus, it's the economic state that we've been in, it's the problems that we've had because of supply chain, because of the pandemic. It is how the stock market is going. It is the fact that we are very likely headed into a recession. It is the fact that mothers can't get baby formula in stores right now in America. There are babies going hungry because of a supply chain shortage, not even because their mothers don't have the money to feed them, as is more often usually the case. But there is an additional reason in America, other than just pure poverty, why children are going hungry. And with all of this, it's easy to feel bad, man. This is how it is. And to really join a movement and to be effective within a movement, you have to make a long-term commitment, because any movement will only be able to generate a real serious change after people have committed to it for some time. I mean, this shirt is just kind of a symbol of a movement that didn't quite make it, even though there were parts of Occupy, even after occupiers were kicked off of public land by the police, there were some private individuals that let us stay on their land. There were occupations that went on for years. And even in places where there were no longer occupations, we still practiced a general assembly, which is a way of a community meeting up to discuss its problems and discuss collective action that they can take to solve those problems. And that's the kind of thing we're going to be talking about in this video, organizing in that way. But at the same time, these organizations that we form, these movements that we fight for, are only really going to change the world if we're able to stick with them. So I think that in growing a garden, especially since I chose mainly perennial plants, things that are going to come back every year if I can keep them alive, I have made a long-term commitment to a living thing that exists purely for my own benefit, although I do plan, if these get, like, especially if my rosemary gets really bushy, I'm just gonna start, like, every year, occasionally just handing out bunches of fresh rosemary as I harvest to my neighbors. And I'd like to grow my other herbs pretty big so that I could do that kind of thing as well. But the point is to demonstrate to you that not all hope is lost, that long-term commitments can yield more satisfying gains than you would have imagined, and that there are real socialist commitments that you could make to your community and to your nation broadly, but these things need to start local first. There are things that you can do.